The safer you make a woman feel, the less she wants to sleep with you. Now, a client of mine, Brad, had been seeing a woman for a few weeks. They weren't official, but they'd slept together a handful of times and spent some time together. And Brad had already started picturing something real, something long term. And a few days ago, she sent him this message. I'll put it up on the screen here somewhere, and I suggest pausing to read it. He wrote to me straight after. He said he wasn't angry. He was just gutted. I've completely friend zoned myself. There's no coming back from this. And he wasn't wrong. What that message actually is, underneath the kindness it's wrapped up in, is a woman telling a man, as gently as she possibly can, that he mirrored her too much of his feminine energy and not enough of his own masculine energy. Once that switch flips in a woman's head, it rarely flips back. Now, if you ever read a version of that message yourself, you already know exactly what it feels like to go back through that message line by line, hoping you missed something. None of it's about your age or your bank account or how you look in a t-shirt. Because if that were the case, she wouldn't have even got close to you in the first place. This is about a switch most men never learn exists, let alone how to flip. It's a specific point in a conversation or a date or even a relationship that's already physical where the whole dynamic locks in as either friend or more. And almost no man knows where that point is until they've walked past it. Now, I've watched this exact shift take a man who couldn't get a second date on the apps to a point where 3 weeks later, he had to turn his apps off. An uninitiated man sees this and thinks, oh, that guy got better looking, got more money, or found the magic book of lines and routines. But if that were true, it would mean success was only limited to those men. Instead, the real reason is he learned where that switch is and how to flip it without becoming someone she'd never trust. Now, by the end of this video, you'll know at least 5 specific signals that flip a woman's brain from, oh, he's safe but no spark, into, I can't stop thinking about him. The same 5 that would have saved Brad 2 weeks ago. Now, the attract video got you in front of her. The qualify strategy made you worth chasing. And I'll link those 2 videos after this if you haven't seen them. But this pillar, the convert pillar, decides whether any of it turns into her hand on your leg at dinner instead of one more great guy she just never texts back. This isn't a bad date problem. It's not even a bad year problem. It's the same switch, man, missed in the same spot on repeat across every app, every setup one of your mates tried to organize, every you two would get along so well situations. Once you start looking for it, you'll probably see it running through your own relationship life going back years. Here's what it actually looks like up close, because I want you to recognize it instead of just nodding along. It's the text thread that runs for 3 weeks. Genuinely good conversation. She replies fast. She asks about your kids. You ask about her weekend, but you never quite manage to turn any of it into an actual second date until the thread just goes quiet on its own. And you're left wondering what happened when nothing actually did. It's the date that ends in a awkward side hug instead of a, hot kiss that you have to push her away from. And you telling yourself, that's just how she is. Well, every other man that she's ever actually wanted, he got something different on date 1. It's being the man she calls when the bloke she's actually sleeping with lets her down again. You're being trusted with the real stuff, the tears, the vent session about some other man, while you sit there taking it as a compliment because at least she trusts you. Look, you haven't been rejected, man. You've been promoted to the safest man in her life. And nobody warns you that safest and wanted run on 2 completely different tracks, and one of them doesn't go anywhere near her bed. And it doesn't stop with her. Her friends love you. Genuinely, they tell her you're a catch, that she'd be mad to let you go, and she nods along and agrees with every word of it. Yet somehow none of that moves the needle a single inch. You've had your worth confirmed by everyone in her circle except the one woman it actually needs to come from. And there's a very specific kind of exhausted that comes from being correct and right about your own value, yet still losing. So you do what any reasonable man does at midnight. You go looking for the answer. You reread the thread 3 times, trying to find the exact line where it turned from warm to nothing. You watch your reply to some other bloke's story within a minute, while your message from Tuesday is still sitting there unopened. You end up 2 hours deep in a Reddit forum written by men angrier and more bitter than you'll ever let yourself become. and you close the laptop feeling worse than when you opened it because none of it explained why him and not you. So you start auditing yourself instead. You wonder if it's the 10 kilos you put on during the marriage, the grey coming through, or whether 45 is just too old to be doing this again. You compare yourself to men who, on paper, offer her less than you do. Less stability, less income, less follow through, less love, and somehow they're the ones she can't stop thinking about. Now, that comparison is the most dangerous thing you can do right now because it sends you hunting for the answer in the wrong place entirely. You start trying to fix your resume when the problem was never your resume. The truth is, man, you've been so good at making women feel comfortable that comfort is now the only setting you know how to run. And the real agitation here isn't that you never learned the other setting, sexual tension, polarity, whatever you want to call it, the spark she's missing. It's that you've done this before. This pattern didn't start on the apps. It started years before the divorce, inside the relationship you thought was solid. And it's the same reason you're standing here now instead of still standing in that relationship or marriage. Now, we'll get to exactly where that comes from in a minute because you need to see the origin before you can fix it for good. This didn't start with the apps or the divorce. It started years earlier inside a relationship you were actually good at running because you were the reliable one, the one who kept the peace, who didn't create dramas, who made sure she always felt safe and heard and never once had to wonder where she stood with you. And if you watch the qualifying video from earlier, you already know where that instinct comes from. I'll link it here somewhere. What I want you to see here is what it actually cost you in real time without either of you noticing it happening. Here's the thing nobody tells high performing men. The exact operating system that wins in your career and business is the one quietly killing your sex life. In business, you remove friction. You anticipate problems before they happen. You keep things stable, predictable, low risk. And that's how you become successful. And that's exactly what you brought home every night for 15 years. Except desire doesn't run on stability. It runs on a small, constant current of uncertainty, the sense that she can't fully predict you, that you're not entirely hers to manage. When you remove all of that in the same way you'd remove a business risk, then you haven't built a stronger relationship full of juicy sexual tension and desire. You've built a very comfortable, very stable, completely sexless one. And that's the actual mechanism. Comfort builds trust, and trust on its own has a ceiling, and that ceiling is called friendship. It doesn't matter if the friendship comes wrapped with a marriage certificate and 2 kids. Without tension sitting on top of that trust, desire has nowhere to live. And when she stopped wanting you, you didn't get a warning. You just got quieter sex, then less, then none. And you told yourself that's just what happens after 5 years, when it's actually what happens after 15 years of only ever giving her one half of what she needed. Now, before we go further, I need to kill an assumption you're probably already forming. That fixing this means becoming someone unpredictable in the bad way. Cold, game playing, the guy who makes her feel like she can never quite be sure if he actually cares. That's not this, man. That approach burns just as fast as pure comfort does, but it just burns from the other direction. What you're about to learn doesn't replace the man who makes her feel safe. It adds the other half back in on top of it in the same conversation. So she gets both the man she can trust with her daughter and the man she can't stop thinking about at 11 at night. That's the entire skill, not becoming someone else, becoming a fuller version of exactly who you already are. And there are 5 very specific places this shows up. Most of them so small you've walked straight past every one of them without even knowing it. So let's go through exactly where. Now, this is the switch I mentioned a minute ago. This is the one that took a bloke like James from invisible on the apps to turning them off 3 weeks later. And the exact one Brad lost hold of 2 weeks before that nasty message showed up. Here's what it actually is: masculine energy and feminine energy running in the same conversation, same date, same relationship. Feminine energy is warmth and reassurance and agreement. It's the instinct to make everyone around you comfortable. Masculine energy is direction and tension, unpredictability, detachment, and putting yourself first. Now, these kinds of things that make her curious and intrigued instead of disinterested. Most men, especially men who are taught to be considerate and safe, run almost entirely on the feminine side without ever realizing it. They become comfortable making her feel good and terrified of creating any friction at all. The convert pillar is the skill of adding your masculine energy back in on top of the feminine warmth you already give so well. It's not one big move, it's many specific signals, each one small enough to use today, each one useless without the previous two pillars I did before sitting underneath it. I'm going to give you what each one is and why it works. The exact wording and timing, the part that decides whether it lands with playful tension or comes across as rejection or worse, creepy, that's what we drill inside the community, because getting it slightly wrong does more damage than not doing it at all. Let's start with texting, because it's where most men lose the thread first. She sends something warm like, "I had such a great time tonight," and every instinct you've built over the last 15 years tells you to match it. Warmth for warmth, gratitude for gratitude. Reassure her, tell her she's wonderful, ask when you can see her again. Don't. That's the exact instinct that built the husband zone in the first place. Instead, you pull back half a step, no more. Acknowledge what she said, then create a small playful retreat instead of chasing her warmth with more warmth. That's push-pull. Warmth, then retreat. Repeat it every time she leans in, so she's the one closing the gap instead of you. The principle is simple, but the exact phrasing is where most men either nail it or blow the whole thing up in one text. But push-pull on its own still isn't sexual. It just creates space. The next piece is where you actually start planting a sexual charge in a conversation without ever saying anything that you couldn't defend her mother. So we talk about sexual misinterpretation. Once that rhythm is running, you can get sexual without ever being direct about it, which matters because direct reads as needy or worse, unsettling and sleazy from a man she hasn't built any tension with yet. She'll say something completely innocent. Maybe she'll mention she's tired or her weekend plans, whatever it is. And instead of replying at face value, you playfully misread it as something sexual. It's a joke, it's deniable, and it plants a sexual frame in a conversation that was, 30 seconds ago, about nothing at all. Now, there's a third piece that goes even further than a joke, though, and it's the one move almost no man in her entire dating history has ever made on her. Almost no man does this, and it's the one that changes the entire power dynamic in a single sentence. You see, every woman you've ever spoken to has spent her whole dating life doing the evaluating, swiping past most men on the apps, running new ones past her friends, deciding who's worth a reply and who isn't. She's always been the one holding the clipboard. Nobody has ever handed it back to her, turned the evaluation around lightly as a joke, the way you were about to. So you tease her suitability instead of hoping she approves of yours, playfully questioning whether she's trouble, whether you can trust her, whether she's the type who breaks hearts. You're not accusing her of anything. You're disarming her, precisely because it's never happened to her before. And all of that's still just words though. What happens when you're actually sitting across from her is a different game entirely, and it starts before either of you even say a single word. In person, it's smaller than people expect, and it happens earlier than people expect. A hand on the small of her back, walking her into the restaurant, a hand on her arm mid-laugh, gone before it becomes a thing. You're not asking permission with a speech about it, man. You're calibrating off what comes back, and then you retreat completely the second you're not getting anything. Eye contact runs a beat longer than feels natural, and when there's a silence, you let it sit instead of rushing to fill it. That extra half second, that held quiet, that's the current running under the whole date. And it only reads as attractive instead of unsettling because it's sitting on top of the safety you've already built. Tension without comfort reads as a threat. Comfort without tension reads as a friend. You need both running at the same time every single time you're in front of her. But none of those four things I've just given you hold for more than a week if you get this last piece wrong. It's the one that quietly wrecks more men than all the others combined. I'm talking about mystery detachment. And this is tied into the volume piece. Because if she's the only option you've got, and this is where most men quietly sabotage everything they just learned. Because if you watch the attract video and pillar, you already know why. Because the second you need this specific woman or this specific interaction to work out, she can feel it and smell the neediness. And it undoes every ounce of tension you just built with your own hands. Detachment isn't coldness and jerkiness. It's not a strategy you perform. It's simply having somewhere else to be, someone else to see, a full life she's stepping into rather than rescuing. And that's the frame the entire skill runs on. Safe enough to trust completely, uncertain enough to crave constantly, and never so invested in the outcome that she can feel you gripping her. That's the what and the why behind those five. What I haven't given you is the exact wording, the calibration, the sequencing, all the mechanics of running each one so it lands as tension instead of backfiring as rejection or worse. If you want that, the actual how, drilled and applied until it's automatic, that's exactly what we work through inside the community, and it costs nothing to join. The link's below. Now, when you stack all five properly, here's exactly what it looks like on a real man in a real inbox 3 weeks after he learned it. It's showing up in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon from a guy telling me he doesn't know what to do because he's got more dates lined up than he has evenings in the week. James is 40, a senior executive, single dad to a couple of preteen kids, divorced a few years ago, genuinely good looking bloke who, by any measure, should have been doing fine on the apps. And he was, sort of. His matches were okay, his dates were okay, just okay in a flat, forgettable way that never quite built into anything real. So I ramped up his profile and his volume at the same time as fixing his conversion. We started on text, where he learned to stop matching warmth with warmth and started creating that little half step of tension instead. Previously, when a woman told him she'd had a great time, he'd write 3 warm lines back thanking her, telling her she was amazing, asking when he could see her again. Now his reply is 5 words, maybe six, with just enough push pull in it that she's now the one typing for the next 2 minutes, trying to get his attention back. Then he carried the exact same shift onto the dates themselves, escalating instead of waiting to be told it was allowed. The combination took both the volume and the quality of what he was getting up a full notch. And inside a few weeks, he told me he'd had to turn his apps off. Not because he ran out of matches, but because his calendar was full. And he said it like a man who genuinely didn't know that that was an option 6 months earlier. Now, that's not a one off. Miguel is 53 and hadn't been on a meaningful date off Tinder in 2 years, swiping into a void, at the point where he'd basically written off the apps as something that worked for other men and not for him. A few weeks of learning this exact material, and he had 5 dates in 1 week. 3 months later, he'd been on dozens. Sure, we changed up his photos, rewrote his bio, but that's just the start. What really changed was the words he used once a woman was actually talking to him, which is the entire point. That's the volume piece from the attract video meeting the conversion piece we've just covered here today. Because once you can actually generate desire instead of just comfort, every one of those matches becomes a live conversation instead of a dead one. Neither of those men changed his face, his job, or his bank balance. James didn't get more attractive between his okay matches and his full calendar. And Miguel didn't get younger between 2 dry years and dozens of dates in 12 weeks. They both learned where the switch was, and that's the entire difference between a man women are comfortable around and a man women can't stop thinking about. Now, guys, that's the conversion. That's the third and final pillar. You've now got all three: attract to fill your pipeline, qualify to make you worth chasing, and convert to turn any of it into something real. There's still one question I haven't answered, and it's the one that actually matters even more. Why did you build this pattern in the first place? Why does a switch this simple take most men their whole life to find, if ever at all? That's not a conversion question. That's a much older one. It's the nice guy pattern. And it's where all of this actually started, long before your first date, your first marriage, or your first, you're such a great guy. Now, that video is coming up soon. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And if you haven't joined the free group yet, that link's still below. There's 247 men working through exactly this right now. Looking forward to seeing you in there.